problem because of their bias,
New construction options.
because of their prejudice and their
Building.
bias. One of those people who insist that we must support the troops,
Construction complete.
and they can't realize the fact you cannot support the troops. You can only support the policies. The troops can't go against the policies. You must support the policies if you support the troops.
Construction complete.
The way to really support the troops is to say, I support the troops to stay in the United States
Unit ready.
and secure our nation.
Complete.
And once there's enough troops
Unit
for that,
ready.
I support the troops to be transitioned into civilian life and to be actually contributing members of society rather than part of the military welfare state. Of course, we think of welfare as something you give to poor people so they can barely make it by, but no, the military is on welfare also. The government has no money. Only what it takes is taxes. And when it gives that money as welfare to the military-industrial complex, to the troops, they are all on welfare. And we only need so many troops to defend our borders. And then the rest of them should be contributing members of society. It should just be the bigger, the better in our military. But you hear that very plainly. We need the biggest and the best military.
New construction
But that's the kind of thing that's just keeping you full of fear and accepting the idea that the military-industrial complex can take thousands of times the resources that it would require to make us very much more prosperous than we are in matters of education and health. And so the one type of person who will be impotent to actually address the real problem, the military-industrial complex taking the resources, the one type of person are chauvinists. Forget what you think chauvinism means. Chauvinism means bias, devotion to any cause, group, or idea, but it especially means zeal, militaristic zeal, and nationalism. So people who insist you must support the troops, you must fund the troops, they must live on as military welfare. You are impotent to solve the problem. Another type of person who cannot solve the problem, there's a rising tide of secularism in this nation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's not if you're a secularist, you can't help with the problem. However, there are a lot of cowardly, dishonest secularists who will say, very popular, stop me if you've heard this one, most wars were about religion. It's absolutely indefensible. And if your bias is that you're secular and you hate religious people, then you are completely impotent to solve the problem. Because the fact is, most wars have been fought over resources. So when we have all these wars going on now, and all this strife, you can pretend it's about, well, this religious faction and that, and Islamic fascism and all this stuff. You can pretend that. You can buy into the idea that all of that is religious-based. The only reason people can convince anyone to do these foolish things in the name of religion or anything is if they lack resources to be educated, healthy, and have another alternative. And so when you fight over resources, that's what creates war. And again, it takes exponentially, I'm going to go into it in a minute, but it's going to take exponentially more resources to fund a war machine than it would to actually educate the entire populace of the United States and keep them healthy and educated. So that's another type of person who cannot address this problem. First, you cannot address this problem if you insist we must support the troops no matter what they're doing, no matter how heinous. The ends will justify the means. You're impotent to solve the most important problem, which is the military-industrial complex taking resources. Secondly, if you are one of those secular people who insists on the lie, the indefensible lie, that religion causes most wars, no. Fights over resources do. Thirdly, if you are a mindless pawn of the media, Trayvon Martin cult has shown one thing, that is that people across this country, millions and millions and millions of people, not just the ones who defend Trayvon or who are on that side, on the other side, millions can be just taken from zero to kill or zero to fear with just a handful of lies from the media. And the media, of course, is just an arm of the military-industrial complex also, keeping you focused on what they frame the problem to be. You really believe that Trayvon Martin and Sanford Police is the problem now. And that's the problem. All they have to do is doctor audio, doctor pictures, say, oh, George Zimmerman is a 300-pound white guy, and they find out he's a 5 foot 150-pound Peruvian. And people are too proud, too arrogant, and too cowardly to admit, wow, the media is really lying and trying to get us divided and conquered. And why would they do that? Again, to keep you from asking the actual questions, which is how do we stop the real problem, which is all of the resources that could go towards education, health, etc., going towards a military-industrial complex. So that's another person, another demographic of people, those who are so easily drugged around by their emotions and by lies. They cannot solve this problem. They're too busy running around in a hamster wheel that the media creates, of course created by the government, the ruling elites, so as to keep you divided and conquered. Another type of person who cannot solve the real problem are feminists or anyone focused on women's rights. Yeah, it's actually the case, because a huge way that women's rights and feminism is promoted as a separate thing, instead of talking about human rights or real equality. Feminism is not equality. What feminism champions are things like the "we can do it." Remember that "we can do it" thing? That was actually World War II propaganda, convincing women to set aside motherhood and civilian life for helping the war mission. And here's the interesting thing. The five-star general, former President Eisenhower, who warned against the military-industrial complex, he fought in World War II. And so when the crisis management of bringing women into the workforce instead of being mothers, when that crisis happened, and then we won the war, never mind how complex and misleading that is, but after the war, instead of saying, "Ooh, that crisis is over, now women can be mothers again," no, instead it's, "Hey, we fought for something and now women have the right to work outside the home." Now, of course, most women were working outside the home anyways, because most women weren't this depiction of a middle-class white woman. Interestingly, a study was shown that far more people think in the United States they are middle class when in fact they are working class or poor class. They have this idea that, no, middle class means you kind of get by. No, when you have this portrayal of middle class, yeah, you're middle class, therefore they're out to get you. No, they're out to get the government. We ain't sick, boss. But when you see the women now being told, "Hey, now you get to work outside the home," all of a sudden when a woman doesn't want to work outside the home when she wants motherhood, hey, you're not a real patriot. That is the atmosphere that we have. Plenty of people will tell you that, "Oh no, these mindless women, they just want to be taken care of and they just want to have kids." That is the not so subtle propaganda that just has been mounting ever since this "we can do it." You know, it's cool. Let's all leave our children and go and build bombs. And that was seen as empowerment. So that's another kind of person who cannot solve this real problem. People who are feminist-minded or think that it is progress or empowering to take women away from motherhood, the most natural thing in the world. Supposedly, if you're a feminist, and usually that goes hand in hand with secularism, naturalism, and all that, and believing, okay, well, the role of a woman should be defined by what she deems fit, and yet every step of the way, women are brainwashed out of their instincts. They're taught to feel empowered when they're sterilized. I mean, if that's your cause, go ahead, but I'm simply saying that type of person cannot solve the real problem, which is that we have wars of aggression going on to fight over resources for the purpose of fueling not health and education, which would be far cheaper than the military-industrial complex, but to fuel weapons and whatnot. No, as it relates to the military-industrial complex, again, plenty of people will think, oh, you have to hate the troops in order to talk about the military-industrial complex or talk about not supporting the troops, when of course we're talking about not supporting the war. Now again, the five-star general of the Army, Eisenhower, he warned against the military-industrial complex, and we have it. It's here. I mean, it's here. The military-industrial complex. It's here. There's another general, very famous, Major General Smedley Butler of the United States Marine Corps, and he gave a speech outlining not to be afraid of them. This was about 10 years before Eisenhower warned against the military-industrial complex. Smedley Butler gave a speech about 10 years prior to that, outlining his involvement of decades in the United States Marine Corps as a general. He talked about his involvement in the military-industrial